As Israel prepares to commit war crimes in Gaza, it doesn't want journalists watching. Israel hasn't allowed any international journalists into the territory since bombing began, and of those Palestinian journalists who were already in Gaza, 10 have been killed. 4 of those were killed alongside their entire families. Within Israel, journalists have also been harassed. They include a team of journalists from BBC Arabic who were assaulted and held at gunpoint by Israeli police in Tel Aviv, and a journalist from the Qatar-based news station Al Arabi who was harassed by an Israeli security guard while broadcasting from the Israeli town of Ashdod.
من المسؤولين الإسرائيليين خلال الأيام الماضية
ما تم دافع
رجعني بشدور
بس ما متى بشدور
كما
ما
نرى
تم دافع
مشاهدينا
ما تم دافع ما מעניין אותי מתי בשידור
מדווח מה אומר דובר צה"ל.
מה אומר דובר צה"ל? מקווה מאוד שאתם אומרים דברים טובים. הבנת אותי? מקווה מאוד שאתם אומרים דברים טובים וכל החמאס האלה צריכים לשחוט אותם. הבנת אותי?
בסדר.
כי אם אתם לא תבלחו את האמת אוי ואבוי לכם.
الآن لمراسلنا أحمد راوشة خلال مشاركته معنا على الهواء من أسدود. ما الذي كان يقوله لك أحمد؟
عناصر من الشرطة الإسرائيلية يحاولون أو يراقبون ما الذي نتحدث، وخرج مرة واحدة للصراخ بهذه الطريقة وللتهديد بطبيعة الحال.
تهديد جديد للطواقم الصحفية كما نرى على الشاشة. عنصر من الشرطة الإسرائيلية يتدخل أثناء مشاركة زميلنا
We'll turn Gaza to dust, we'll turn Gaza to dust. That was sort of widely reported as being a policeman. I think, it says security on his hat. So I think he's a security guard. But, clearly from the language we've been hearing from politicians, arguing that you want to turn Gaza to dust is not a minority position in Israel. A journalist has also been killed close to Israel's border with Lebanon. He worked for Reuters, and this report is via CNN.
Reuters journalist Issam Abdullah was filming a live shot while in southern Lebanon when Israel fired artillery into the area where he was gathered with several other journalists. Abdullah was killed in the blast and 6 other journalists were injured. Reuters says they partially muted the live stream they published out of respect for colleagues involved. The journalists were wearing jackets clearly labeled press at the time of the attack. The Israel Defense Forces acknowledged firing artillery into Lebanon, but a spokesman did not admit it was an Israeli strike that took Abdullah's life, telling CNN that it was in response to an explosion near the security fence.
And completely appalling journalists being killed for doing their job. And I think one thing this really raises, right? So you hear all the time, Israel are different, they don't target civilians, they've got these very high-tech weapons, which means that everything can be very targeted. If it's completely unavoidable, there might be some civilians that die if they've got to get this military target that happens to have civilians sort of living near it. Now, I don't buy that, but that's the argument they make, right? But here, they weren't near a military target, and they were all there was a whole huddle of journalists, right, with press written on them. So either Israel is just, shooting out rockets willy-nilly, or it seems like they did target journalists here, because, as I said, there was a lot there. There was one journalist who was tragically killed and a number of others who were injured. If you get into a situation where journalists are made to be terrified of covering a war, why would a state that's committing war crimes want to do that, right? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out that might be something which would benefit the side who are committing war crimes and who have absolute power on the battlefield, to be honest. Of course, social media means that footage from war zones won't just come from professional journalists, but due to Israel blocking their energy supplies, the connection of Gazans to the outside world is under threat. Marwa Fatafta is a policy analyst at the Palestinian think tank Al-Shabaka. She told the Washington Post this: people don't have enough electricity to charge up their devices. There are people who can't send SMS messages. Some telecommunications infrastructure has been damaged. It's becoming an information blackout. Barnaby, what do you make of this? Why might the Israelis not want journalists covering their war?
Well, I think your question answers itself there, doesn't it, Michael? Israel relies on a binary between the civilized and the savage, which says that things that white men in suits do are always different from things that Arab men with rockets do. And the things that white men in suits do are always more to be trusted, which is why you see their accounts of their atrocities get taken more seriously by the Western media than Palestinian accounts do. And it's this strange thing, right, where they'll use the history of anti-Semitism and say we're the victims of European civilization, we're Jews, and then in fact use the fact that they have ceased to be in the European imagination Semites, Jews, outsiders, and have become representatives of whiteness, people who can be trusted as good imperialist allies. They'll use that to their advantage. The founding Zionists, people like Theodor Herzl, were assimilationists who wanted Jews to become less Jewish, and then realized in becoming Zionists that what we really needed to do to become less Jewish was to have what all the other Europeans did, which was a nation state, ideally a colonial, imperial nation state. So Zionism is a project in turning Jews into white Westerners. And as white Westerners, you get to murder people with impunity. It's what America does all over the world. It's what Britain's done all over the world for centuries. And now it's what Israel does. And what you don't want is journalists coming in to ask questions. Fortunately for them, journalists can sometimes be relied on to have a lot of credulity and report what they want, while journalists can freely stand in the south of Israel and interview people whose family members were killed by Hamas rockets. Access to Gaza is much more difficult. Even when journalists can get to Gaza, there is this enormous inequality where, because the numbers of people killed are usually so unequal. I mean, part of Israel's ferocity in this attack is because for the first time, there were a few days when more Israelis had been killed than Palestinians. But if you look at the graphs of numbers killed over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it's always vastly, disproportionately, Palestinians killed meant much more than Israelis. Journalists will go and find the families of a few of the small numbers of Israelis murdered by Palestinians and will tell their stories of those individuals. And then we'll come to Gaza and just see a wall of death and destruction. And so Palestinians don't get the kind of individuality, the kind of personality that Israeli victims get, because the scale is just so overwhelming that you don't hear about the lives that every child and baby and student and mother lived or could have lived in Palestine. You just see these huge fields full of dead bodies. As I said earlier, ice cream trucks now full of dead bodies. Whereas in Israel, when people are killed, they get personality because the numbers are smaller and they're reported on as individuals. So even when journalists can get there, the reporting is very unbalanced. But of course, Israel doesn't want journalists to get there, just as in apartheid South Africa, they did everything they could to stop journalists reaching the townships and reporting on the scale of the violence that the state was committing.